The sun hung low over the small, dusty town of Crestwood, its golden rays stretching across cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts. In this forgotten corner of the world, dreams were as scarce as rain. Most people here clung to the safety of routine, work at the factory, evenings at the local diner, and whispered complaints about a life that never changed. But Elena Martinez was different. Even as a child, her eyes sparkled with a fire that refused to dim, no matter how often the world tried to snuff it out. Elena grew up in a cramped apartment above the laundromat, where the hum of washing machines was her lullaby. Her mother, Rosa, worked double shifts to keep food on the table, while her father had left years ago, chasing promises that never materialized. Elena was 12 when she first shared her dream aloud. It was a warm summer evening, and she sat on the apartment's fire escape, her legs dangling over the edge, a tattered notebook in her lap. Rosa, exhausted from her shift, leaned against the railing, listening as Elena spoke. "Mama, I'm going to build something big one day," Elena said, her voice trembling with conviction. "A company, maybe. Something that helps people. I want to make sure no one feels stuck, like we do." Rosa smiled, but her eyes were heavy with doubt. "Dreams are nice, Mija, but they don't pay the bills. You're smart. Focus on school, get a steady job. That's what matters." Elena nodded, but her heart sank. She clutched her notebook tighter, its pages filled with sketches of inventions, business ideas, and plans she barely understood but felt destined to create. That night, she promised herself she'd prove her mother wrong, not out of spite, but because she believed her dreams were worth fighting for. School was no kinder to Elena's ambitions. Crestwood High was a place where conformity reigned, and anyone who dared to stand out was quickly cut down. Elena was a quiet student, her nose often buried in books about entrepreneurs and inventors, but her classmates noticed her intensity. During a class presentation in her sophomore year, she shared her vision for a community center, a place where people could learn skills, start businesses, and escape the cycle of poverty. She stood at the front of the classroom, her voice steady despite her nerves, describing a building with bright classrooms, workshops, and a garden where families could grow their own food. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, a snicker broke the stillness. Tommy Carver, the class bully, leaned back in his chair. "A community center? What, you think you're Oprah now? Get real, Elena. You're from the laundromat. Stick to folding clothes." Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel. Elena's cheeks burned, but she held her ground, her hands clenched at her sides. The teacher, Mrs. Hargrove, didn't intervene. She just cleared her throat and called the next student. That moment seared itself into Elena's memory. As she walked home that day, her backpack heavy with books and shame, she vowed to turn their mockery into fuel. Years passed, and Elena's determination grew stronger, even as life grew harder. After high school, she worked odd jobs, waitressing at the diner, tutoring younger kids, cleaning houses, while taking night classes at the community college 30 miles away. She studied business, technology, and design, piecing together knowledge like a puzzle she was destined to solve. Her notebook, now worn and dog-eared, traveled everywhere with her, its pages brimming with ideas for her community center, now refined into a detailed business plan. But Crestwood hadn't changed. The townsfolk still saw Elena as the dreamer who didn't know her place. At the diner, where she served coffee to the same faces every morning, she overheard their whispers. "That Martinez girl thinks she's going to be some big shot," one man muttered over his eggs. "She'll end up like her mother, working herself to death." Elena pretended not to hear, but each word stung. At night, alone in her tiny bedroom, she wrestled with doubt. What if they were right? What if her dreams were too big for someone like her? Yet, every time she considered giving up, she remembered the fire escape, the notebook, and the promise she'd made to herself. She couldn't quit. Not now, not ever. The turning point came when Elena was 22. She'd saved enough money to attend a small business conference in the city, a rare opportunity to pitch her community center idea to investors. She spent weeks preparing, rehearsing her presentation until her voice was hoarse. On the day of the conference, she stood in a borrowed blazer, her heart pounding, as she faced a panel of stern-faced investors. Her pitch was clear and passionate, outlining a nonprofit organization called Rise Up, which would provide education, job training, and microloans to underserved communities like Crestwood. The investors listened politely, but their questions were sharp. "What experience do you have?" one asked. "Why would anyone trust a young woman from a small town with no track record?" another pressed. Elena answered with facts and conviction, but she saw the skepticism in their eyes. When the conference ended, no one offered funding. Defeated, she boarded the bus back to Crestwood, staring out the window as the city lights faded into darkness. But something shifted in Elena that night. The rejection didn't break her, it clarified her resolve. If the world wouldn't give her a chance, she'd create one herself. She returned to Crestwood with a new plan: start small, prove the concept, and build from there. She began by offering free tutoring sessions in the laundromat's back room, teaching math and reading to neighborhood kids. Word spread, and soon, parents asked if she could teach them, too, basic computer skills, resume writing, anything to improve their job prospects. Elena saw an opportunity. She rented a vacant storefront with her savings, transforming it into a makeshift classroom. She called it the Rise Up Hub. It was modest, just a few tables, second-hand computers, and a chalkboard, but it was hers. She worked tirelessly, teaching classes, writing grants, and knocking on doors to spread the word. Slowly, people came. First, a handful of kids. Then, their parents. Then, factory workers who'd lost hope of a better life. One of her first students was Maria, a single mother who dropped out of high school. Maria was shy, her confidence eroded by years of struggle, but Elena saw potential in her. "You're smart, Maria," Elena told her during a late-night class. "You just need a chance to show it." Elena helped Maria earn her GED, then guided her through a coding bootcamp. Within a year, Maria landed a job as a junior developer, doubling her income. When Maria hugged Elena, tears in her eyes, she whispered, "You changed my life." Stories like Maria's spread, and the Rise Up Hub grew. Elena hired teachers, expanded classes, and secured small grants to keep the lights on. But growth brought challenges. The town's old guard, people like Tommy Carver, now a foreman at the factory, resented her success. "She's stirring things up," Tommy grumbled at the diner. People were fine before she started filling their heads with ideas. Elena ignored the critics, but the pressure mounted. She was 25 now, juggling the hub's operations, her own studies, and her mother's declining health. Rosa had developed arthritis, making her shifts at the laundromat unbearable. Elena took on extra jobs to cover medical bills, but the stress was relentless. One night, exhausted and overwhelmed, she sat at the hub's empty classroom, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself. "Maybe they were right. Maybe this is too much." The next morning, everything changed. A local news station ran a story about the Rise Up Hub, highlighting Maria's transformation and others like it. The segment went viral, catching the attention of a philanthropist named Clara Bennett. Clara, a former tech CEO, was moved by Elena's mission. She visited Crestwood unannounced, walking into the hub during a bustling evening class. Elena, flustered, gave her a tour, expecting polite interest at best. Instead, Clara sat down and said, "I want to invest in you. Not just money, resources, connections, everything you need to scale this." Clara's support was a game changer. With her backing, Elena expanded the Rise Up Hub into a full-fledged community center, complete with classrooms, a tech lab, and a small business incubator. She hired Maria as the hub's operations manager, giving her a leadership role she'd never imagined. The center offered microloans to local entrepreneurs, helping people like Javier, a mechanic, open his own repair shop, and Aisha, a baker, launch a catering business. Crestwood began to change. Empty storefronts filled with new businesses. Families had hope again. But Elena's vision didn't stop at Crestwood. She used Clara's network to replicate the Rise Up model in other towns, creating a nonprofit empire that empowered communities across the region. By the time she was 30, Rise Up had transformed thousands of lives, earning Elena recognition as a social entrepreneur. She spoke at conferences, once standing on the same stage where she'd been rejected years earlier. This time, the room stood in applause. Back in Crestwood, the naysayers grew quiet. Even Tommy Carver, whose daughter now attended Rise Up's coding classes, admitted he'd been wrong. "Didn't think you'd pull it off," he muttered to Elena one day, almost sheepishly. She just smiled and said, "I didn't do it for you. I did it for us." The greatest moment came when Elena brought Rosa to the Crestwood Rise Up Center's grand opening. Rosa, now retired and walking with a cane, gazed at the gleaming building, its garden blooming, its classrooms alive with laughter. Tears filled her eyes as she took Elena's hand. "Mija, I was wrong," she said. "You didn't just dream. You built something better than I could have imagined." As Elena stood on the center steps, looking out at the crowd, her students, her neighbors, her family, she felt the weight of every struggle, every doubt, every moment of mockery. And she felt the triumph of overcoming them. She hadn't just built an empire, she'd built a legacy. Crestwood, once a place of faded hopes, was now a beacon of possibility, proof that one person's dream could change everything. And so, Elena's story became a testament to the power of resilience. They mocked her for her dreams, but she built her own empire, and in doing so, she changed their lives.